Most leaders think they're being thorough. They're building a dependency machine. It's called a context dump, and the fix is 3 layers. Mark asked about one API change, and Priya buried him in 6 months of history, 6 stakeholders, and 0 clarity on who owns the call. Mark is a senior engineer. He's sharp, he's been around, and he owns the API contract that touches 3 downstream services. On Tuesday morning, he pings Priya. Can he change an internal API contract to support a new checkout flow? That's a 5-minute decision for someone who knows the system. But Priya wants to be thorough, so she answers with context. She replies with 6 stakeholders, 3 historical problems, and a sales deal that might not even be real. What Mark hears is 6 stakeholders, 3 historical problems, 2 hypothetical risks, and 0 clarity on whether he can make the call. Now he has more questions than when he started. He wonders if he needs approval from product, if he should contact sales, whether security needs to review this, and if he can change the contract at all. You've had this message in your Slack this week. The problem isn't that Priya gave him too little information. She gave him context without hierarchy. Every piece had the same weight, so Mark couldn't tell what was important, what was background, or where his authority began and ended. You see what one dump does, so stack them up. Monday, it's a vendor spec. Tuesday, it's architecture. And Wednesday, it's deployment. Each interruption feels reasonable, and each one feels like collaboration. But stack them up, and here's what you've built. Here's what that Slack message actually costs. 45 minutes of Mark's time, 6 hours of Priya's week, and 1 engineer who learned his judgment isn't enough. Research at UC Irvine found it takes about 23 minutes to refocus after an interruption like that. Multiply that by every question Priya buries in unnecessary context, and you can see where her week went. That's decision dependency. I've spent 25 years building engineering teams, and I've seen both Mark and Priya. McKinsey found managers spend 60% of their time on coordination, not decision-making. Priya didn't mean to build it, but she did. She became the human operating system for her team. Every decision that doesn't have a routing rule gets manually processed through her. By Wednesday afternoon, Priya has answered 14 questions that were never supposed to reach her. By Friday, she spent 6 hours this week being a human router, and her own roadmap hasn't moved. And the more context she gives, the less confident Mark becomes, because she's teaching him that these calls are too complicated to make without her. I did this early in my own leadership career. Someone would bring me a problem and I'd explain every exception I knew. I thought I was helping them avoid mistakes. What I was teaching them was that the decision was too complicated without me. And that's not empowering. That's training them to need you. Most leaders confuse context with a complete transfer of everything they know. They unload history, personalities, politics, previous failures, possible future problems, and their preferred solution. Then they say, this one always kills me, but use your judgment. What the employee hears is, this is too complex for you to handle alone. So they stop trying. They bring you the problem earlier with less thinking and more frequency. That's the permission system disguised as leadership. Good context doesn't answer every possible question. It tells someone what matters when they encounter a question you don't anticipate. And the way you do that is with 3 layers. Stay with me, because the first one is the layer almost every organization completely skips. This is the context stack. It has 3 layers that turn a context dump into a decision handoff. Layer 1 is the decision frame, and it's the one almost every leader skips. Before giving any context, you name the decision, and most leaders skip this because it feels slow, but it isn't. Naming the decision takes 10 seconds, but it saves you 20 minutes of explaining why the information matters. Then you define the outcome that matters, the boundaries they can't cross, the conditions that require escalation, and freedom to act without approval. Here's what Priya should have said. You own the API design. The outcome we need is the new checkout flow launching by Friday without breaking the existing clients. You can change the contract, introduce a new version, or add a compatibility layer. But don't remove an existing field without a migration path, and don't delay the launch by more than 1 day. Involve security only if authentication or customer data handling changes. Otherwise, make the decision and just tell me what you chose. Look at what that frame gives Mark. He gets the decision that he owns, the outcome that matters, the boundaries he can't cross, the escalation condition, and freedom to act without Priya's approval. The shift is subtle, but it's massive. Mark goes from asking permission to making a call. Priya goes from being a human search engine to being unnecessary for this decision. That's the architecture working. Priya isn't telling Mark which technical solution to pick. She's defining the field of play, and she's allowing him to play inside it. Now, layer 2 is what keeps the frame clean. It's the relevance filter. What Mark needs to know and what Priya wants him to know, those are different things. The filter strips out history, politics, and hypothetical risks that don't affect this decision. If it doesn't change what Mark should do today, it doesn't belong in the frame. The test is simple. If you removed this fact, would Mark's decision change? If the answer is no, it stays out. The enterprise team's promise from last year doesn't change his API decision. The sales prospect that may not be real, that doesn't change it either. What changes it is the Friday deadline, the existing clients that can't break, and the security boundary. Layer 3 is the escalation boundary. You need to know what's inside Mark's decision domain and what's outside it. The boundary must be written, not implied. Mark has to guess whether he needs approval, then the boundary doesn't exist. Implied boundaries are just delayed escalations, wearing a trust costume. Written boundaries are what make trust real. In Priya's frame, Mark owns the API design, the contract change, and the version choice. Security only enters if authentication or customer data handling changes. Everything else stays on his desk. That's the context stack, and those 3 layers are decision frame, relevance filter, and escalation boundary. Here's the gap that most leaders hit. You can understand all 3 layers and still default to the dump. So you start with one sentence. You own this decision. The outcome we need is blank. Stay within these boundaries, and then insert the blank. Come back to me only if blank. Fill in the blanks before your next conversation. The sentence works because it forces you to decide what matters before you open your mouth. Most leaders never do that, and they start talking, hoping clarity emerges, but it doesn't. Here's how it sounds with a vendor selection. You own the vendor selection. We need a vendor that can launch within 30 days and stay under $25,000. Don't sign a contract longer than 1 year. Come back to me only if none of the qualified options can meet those conditions. Here's what it sounds like for a deployment rollback. You own the rollback call. The outcome we need is for the customer checkout to stay up. You can roll back without approval if error rates pass 1% for more than 5 minutes. Come back to me only if the rollback doesn't fix it or if you need to touch the payment processor. And here's the same pattern for a hiring decision. You own the final round yes or no. The outcome we need is someone who can own the intake system within 60 days. Don't offer above level 4 compensation. Come back to me only if they want equity negotiations or a title change. What this forces is the real value. You separate essential context from noise. You give your employees something more useful than an answer, which is a repeatable way to make the next decision without asking you again. Now, the next time Mark faces a similar API question, he won't ping you. He'll run the frame himself because he knows what he owns. But here's where most people mess up. Leaders try to anticipate every edge case inside the frame. Don't do this. The frame isn't a contract. It's a decision field. If Mark hits something unexpected, the escalation boundary is already defined. He knows when to come back, and you know he won't come back with questions that should have stayed on his desk. Control doesn't scale. Clarity is what scales. When your team knows what they own, they stop needing you for every decision. That isn't abandonment. That's the architecture. If you recognized Priya's dump in your own Slack, hit subscribe. We fix this stuff every week. Drop your current bottleneck in the comments. I'll tell you which layer to fix first. Now, get to work.